Okay, let's get started. As you might have seen, I did send around an email last night, and if you didn't see it, I'll convey it to you in person. I had a number of folks who said I had trouble getting access to the quiz one. I had a number of folks who said, oh, I now kind of get it better. Can I take it again for 1 and 2? And so I've reopened the first quiz, the second quiz, made them due today. So if you had problems or you've been struggling a little bit, you've got a chance to go back in and either retake or take for the first time for the folks who weren't able to get their book in time for the first one to close and get those taken. So take advantage of the fact that it's open. You'll see there's probably a couple points in the semester where there'll be a mercy extension, particularly if we end up with this week, for instance, and we get through to Wednesday and we're like, okay, we're still not comfortable with time value of money stuff. I'll start pushing things out. But I need you either collectively or individually to let me know that there's issues so that I can accommodate. Otherwise, I have to look at the grading and look at the problems that are getting missed and go, okay, I see that there's a problem here, but I'm not getting any feedback. The other thing is, just want to remind everybody that I've got office hours Tuesday, 8:30 to 10 in Old Main 206. And so if you have any questions, problems, or concerns, please feel free to come up and see me in Old Main 206 Tuesdays, 8:30 to 10. Additionally, if that's not going to work for your schedule, as I've let you know at the beginning of the semester, I live on campus during the week, and so don't hesitate if you are like, I need a little bit of help. Drop me a line, and we could set up a meeting, even if it's here in Harned, it's 6 in the evening or 6:30 after dinner. I've got no issue meeting with you guys and gals to get this stuff dealt with and make sure that you're comfortable. If we don't get through this, if you're not comfortable getting through this, chapter 4 and chapter 5, this becomes a very, very difficult class. If you get comfortable in chapter 4 and chapter 5, this becomes a relatively straightforward class, and it's really trying to understand the application of it. So if you're struggling at all, please make an appointment. Let's sit down and go through it. Yes, ma'am.
It has been end of day, business day. So what time is it actually closing?
Midnight. Because that's my business day. So yeah, midnight. And again, just a reminder, this Friday, no class. There's board of trustees folks that are going to be wandering around. If anybody has a perverse or strange interest in attending any board of trustees committee meetings, whether it's audit or finance or facilities or institutional advancement, which is fundraising stuff, let me know and I can see if I can get you an invite. And those are going to be on Wednesday and Thursday during the day. Any questions on chapter 1, 2, 3, or 4? Uncomfortable silence. Okay. So I'm going to dive into a little bit more of chapter 4. We talked about future value last class. We're going to talk about present value this class. Present value and future value are two sides of the same coin. It's essentially telling us what's something worth today. Future value, you're going, what's something worth tomorrow, given something today. Present value is given something in the future, what's that worth today? And that's how we compare two different streams of cash flows. Whether one is better than the other is, you remember we said we've got to compare them at the same point in time. You can't compare two different time periods. You have to compare them at the same point in time. There's a reason for that. One is you've got things like inflation. We talked about house prices. The other part is you need to be compensated for the delay in receipt of your money. And it's all about the cash here. And so we need to go, okay, how am I being compensated? So the value of any given financial asset is the sum of the expected future cash flows discounted at the interest rate. And the interest rate is a factor of the risk associated with those future cash flows. And as I said, I'm going to repeat that in some form or another every class over and over again because it's a critical piece of finance. In present value, we're looking at, we have a cash flow that's occurring in the future. How much is that worth to us today? So if I said, here's $100 and I'm going to give it to you next February 8th, so February 8th of 2019, how much is that worth to you today? What factors do you need to have to determine how much that's worth to you today? You know what the future value is, right? Which is $100 a year from now. What's the piece that you don't have? Say again? The present value, what it is right now. So we've got the future value. We want to try and figure out what that's worth today, $100 in a year. What's the one piece that kind of connects those two? The interest rate. The interest rate is going to be a factor of how risky is it that I'm not going to pay you a year from now. Or that you could have done something else with that money for the year that you let me have it. So if I said, okay, I'm going to give you $100 a year from now, you say, okay, that's worth $95 to me today, or $93 to me today. So you have an indifference point between $100 in a year or $93 or $95 today. And the calculation of how you figure out that indifference point is the present value calculation, and the two components you need are the future cash flows and the risk, the analysis of the risk associated with those future cash flows as evidenced by the interest rate. So those two pieces, the interest rate and the cash flow, combine together to get you present value. You'll hear this term discounting. And it's because you take that $100 and you discount it back. You discount the value of it to today. So $100 a year from now, you're not going to go, even if you think I'm a really good credit risk, you shouldn't give me $100 today to get $100 back a year from now. You should go, hey, I need at least some bit of interest. If I loan that money to the U.S. government, I'm going to at least get 1%. I'm going to at least get, if I loan them $100, maybe $101 back in a year. And so you shouldn't lend at 0%. And so discounting is essentially saying, if I've got $100 that I'm going to get a year from now, it's going to be a discounted amount that is worth today. So that discounted amount might be, depending on the risk, $99 might be $55 or $12 or $10. It depends on how risky that cash flow stream is and the chances of you getting repaid. We went through and looked at future value last class, and all we're doing is reversing the process. We're essentially, where we worked it this way and bounced down this timeline to come up with a future value. This is $702.40 or $935 3 years from now. Remember, we had the 10%. What's the present value of that? You essentially divide by 1.10 each step of the way to come back to 702.48. So 935 3 years from now is worth 702.48 today. Or when we looked at it the other way, $700 today is worth about $932 3 years from now. So you can look at it from a present value perspective or a future value perspective and still get the same answer, which is you would rather have $935 3 years from now than $700 today, given the risk associated with a 10% rate of return. Is there anybody who is having trouble grasping that concept? The present value is equal to the future value over 1 plus the return to the n power, where n is the number of periods that you're discounting, or n is the number of periods going forward to the future. That's a lump sum. That's one payment. We'll look at present or future value, present value of future cash flows where they're payments and where they're annuities. But this is how you calculate it. Again, we're not going to look at memorization of formulas, but it's important to understand that in all these finance formulas, you're going to come up with 2 components to get a third. The 2 components are going to be a cash flow and an interest rate. And you're either going to be looking for a present value or a future value. In this particular case, we're looking for present value. Last class, we looked for future value, and you use the same numbers. So what's the present value of $935 due in 3 years at an interest rate of 10%? You essentially go through the math, or you can use the PV calculation in Excel, and you're going to get 702.48. We walked it through on a timeline. This is a walkthrough by the formula, and you can walk it through in Excel. The present value of an annuity. So what's an annuity? Somebody remind me what an annuity is. What else? It's a payment over time. It's a series of payments over time. What other component is important when we think of an annuity? Well, so you've got an annuity, an ordinary annuity, or an annuity due. The other thing to remember about an annuity is the cash flow, the payment is the same amount in each period. So it's $100, $100, $100, $100, $100. That's an annuity. If it's $100, $200, $150, $300, that's a stream of cash flows. That's a stream of payments. That's not an annuity. So if you use an annuity formula and you've got uneven cash flows, it's not going to work. For a present value of an annuity, or the present value of any series of cash flows, all you do is take each cash flow, just like we did in the last example, and discount it back and then sum the total. And you could do it by hand, you could do it with Excel, you could do it in a calculator, but it's not conceptually all that hard. If you think about, even if you had 300 payments in a typical mortgage, 360 payments, you could discount each one of those payments back using that formula and sum up the total to come up with the present value. And you can see that here. This is an ordinary annuity. And why is it an ordinary annuity? Because the payment's at the end of the period. What would it be if the payment was at the beginning of the period? An annuity due. And so when remember to look for ordinary annuity and annuity due. And when we look in Excel, and you've got the formula, and it's got essentially 5 components to it with commas separating it, the last piece is annuity, ordinary annuity versus annuity due. It's a 0 if it's an ordinary annuity. It's a 1 if it's an annuity due. Pay attention to that because it's going to cause you one compounding difference. And we looked at that last class, which is going to make your answer wrong. If you get it, if you miss it, you will default, and in the class and in the exams and in the real world, the default is an ordinary annuity. The payment's at the end of every period. But keep your eyes open for annuity due, payment at the beginning of a period, because you need to change the formula just a little bit. As you can see in this particular case, it's an ordinary annuity, and the easiest way to figure out what the present value is to discount each cash flow. 400, 400, 2 periods, 3 periods, 1 period at 5%. There's no discounting here at 0. because there was no payment. So you add these together and it comes up to $1,089.30. That's the present value of this annuity, $400 ordinary annuity paid 3 times, year 1, year 2, year 3, at 5%. What is this? It's a present value, but what does present value in this particular case mean? What am I, if I said I'll sell this thing to you, I'll sell you 3 payments of $400, 1 a year from now, 1 2 years from now, 1 3 years from now, and a present value is $1,089.30. If I said I'd sell that to you for $1,000, would you buy it? Yes or no? If you didn't need the money for something else, that's a good deal. If I said it's $1,100, would you buy it? Yes or no? No. This becomes critically important in Chapter 5. When we're looking at the value of stocks and bonds, or when you're looking at the value of a piece of rental real estate or any other asset, piece of equipment or machinery, this is essentially the process by which you'll go about figuring out what that's worth. What are the future cash flows from that asset? Discount it back, figuring out what that interest rate is, and we're going to talk about interest rates because, as you can probably tell, that's the critical piece to the puzzle. The cash flow is relatively easy to estimate, especially when it's a stock or a bond where you've got dividends and you've got a piece of machinery and you know what your sales are going to be. The hard part is to figure out what your risk is and how to come up with the right interest rate. But in this particular case, if this was a bond that paid 3 times $400, one at the end of year 1, one at the end of year 2, one at the end of year 3, you would not pay more than $1,089.30 for it, given the risk associated with that bond, which you've determined to be 5%. Is there anybody have any questions on that concept? Because again, we keep coming back to this critical concept of it's the cash flow, it's the risk, gives you the value. I won't kill you with the equation, but you can see it's got the same components as every other equation does, in that you're looking for 3 pieces. You've got a payment, which is your cash flow stream. You've got a rate of return. You've got the number of periods. And you're trying to come up with a value, a present value in this particular case. When you're trying to solve for any finance problem, you're generally going to be given 2 of the 3 or 3 of the 3 components, and you're going to be solving for the 1 remaining. So in this particular case, you can get the present value, and again, Excel will help you solve for this. You can get a present value, a rate, and a number of periods, and it's going to tell you, and you have to calculate what the payment is, and that's a PMT function. So every problem you're going to get in finance is really going to have 3 of the 4 pieces, and you're going to solve for the 4th, but you're not necessarily sure, or you can end up having to solve for all of them. N, R, present value, or future value, or the cash flow stream. In this particular case, that's what the equation will look like. We talked briefly about a present value of an annuity due. Annuity due means that it's paid at the beginning of the period, which means you can see that the value of the present value of the annuity due is higher, just a little bit. It was $1,080, and this is $1,143. So it's higher by about $60. Why is it higher by $60?
Because you have that extra compounding period.
You've got 1 extra compounding period, or you got the money sooner. Remember, time has a money value, money has a time value. The sooner you get the money, the more valuable it becomes. And so you can think about it one of 2 ways. You can think about it in terms of okay, it's compounding an extra step. So I've got one compounding here, I've got a compounding here, and I've got a compounding here if I was looking at future value. Or you can look at it and go, I'm getting my money quicker. And so if I get it quicker, money has a time value, and therefore, the sooner I get it, the more valuable that money is. And so in this particular case, you can see that it's discounted at 1 times 1.05. You essentially have no discount at all in the first period, because you go, okay, I'm going to pay $1143.76 for this cash flow stream, and as soon as you hand them your check for $1143.76, they hand you back a check for $400. And then you go, okay, now I've got to wait 1 year, 2 years, and then I'm done. And again, in Excel, the annuity due is the last logic condition in the formula. It's a 1 if it's an annuity due, it's a 0 if it's an ordinary annuity. It defaults to ordinary annuity if you don't put it in. Normally, you'll see annuity due. If you don't, be on the lookout for problems that say the payment will be made at the beginning of the period. If you see beginning of the period, you should immediately flag that as an annuity due or a payment that's going to have one less discounting period. And that's the fun formula. Again, it's the same components. Payment and R and number of periods. And then the present value. And there's a solution. So now we're going to talk about perpetuities. I love perpetuities. We talked a little bit about them last class. What's a perpetuity? What does it sound like? Something that goes on forever. So if I said I'm going to give you $100 every year forever, we can calculate the value for that in finance. And it's not an infinite number. Because if you think about how these formulas work, the further out you go, when we go back to this formula, oops. If we go back to this formula, you can see that every year you go out, the present value of these cash flows begins to approach 0. And so when you think about a perpetuity, you go, I'm going to pay you $100 a year forever. How much is that payment going to be worth to you in 75 years? Not a whole heck of a lot. How about 125 years? To you, it's probably worth absolutely nothing, because most of us won't be here in 125 years. And so as you mathematically begin to calculate a perpetuity, the value of that perpetuity begins to converge on the value of each additional payment begins to converge to 0. Yes, sir.
Why is the value on the first one and the second one different? Even though like the math is the same. You see, like where it says 0 and then it goes.
Oh yeah.
It goes to 3895, but it's the same number.
To the 0, to the 1, and to the 2. Yeah. This is what happens when you put slides together late. Good call. Bonus point. Find errors in a professor's slide, you get bonus points. Yeah, keep track. Oh, yeah. So here's the present value of a perpetuity. We're going to give you $100 every year for forever at a 5% discount rate. That's worth $2,000. Now you might go, hey, I pay more than $2,000 for that. What does that indicate to you? If you pay $2,500 for that, what would change in this formula? The interest rate, the interest rate would be lower, which means you view the risk as being safer than what this is. Remember, the interest rate is a function of risk. And so if you're going, okay, I'd pay more than $2,000 for that, you're saying that 5% is giving it too much risk. And therefore, this would be a good deal. If you're saying there's no way, I'm not paying more than $1,000 for that, and the interest rate goes up to 10%, what is that an indicator of? How do you feel about that cash flow stream? It's more risky than this one for sure. You may say it's pretty risky, period, in which case you might go 20% or 30% or 50%. In which case you're going, hey, I don't expect that I'm going to get all this money. So I might think I'm going to get it for a couple of years. I want a 25, 30, 40% interest rate or discount rate. And you'll hear that used interchangeably. I'm going to try and use interest in the class so that we kind of think about that formula of it's the present value, the value of any given asset is the present value of the expected future cash flows discounted at the interest rate. You'll also hear it or see it called discount rate or required rate of return. All of those are interchangeable. So if you've got an uneven cash flow stream, this is not an annuity. Make sure that when you're trying to solve for uneven cash flow streams, you don't use annuity formulas because they're going to break. So in this particular case, it's just as simple as making a discount. 1, 2, 3. Boom, boom, boom. Discount each one of these back separately and sum the total. So if we said you're going to receive $400 a year 1, $300 a year 2, $250 a year 3, and we're going to discount that at 5%, or we're going to use a 5% interest rate, you would take that first year and discount it back, the second year discount it back, third year discount it back, add it together, and how much would you be willing to pay for that cash flow stream today? If this was a bond or if this was a security, how much would you be willing to pay for this security today? Which is how much based upon this formula? $869.02. If it was offered to you for $870, you'd say no. If it was offered to you for $850, you'd say heck yes all day long. And if it's at $869.02, you're indifferent as to whether to keep your $869.02 or whether to get $400 in a year, $300 in 2 years, and $250 in 3 years. I'm seeing head shaking, and not in good ways. Questions?
So if you're paying total of $950,
Yep.
over the lifespan of this annuity.
Not an annuity.
Oh,
Cash flow stream.
not
Yep.
an annuity. Wouldn't you want to get more? Oh, so that's what you're paying for it right now.
Yep.
Okay.
That's what you're paying for right now. Remember, this is the asset value. So if you want to pay more for it, what does that mean would change?
The discount rate.
The discount rate or the interest rate. And if you're going to pay more for it, and what would happen to the interest rate or discount rate? Would it go up or down? It would go down, which means your perception of the risk associated with these cash flows are safer, or it's less risky than what it's being priced at here.
That would, of course, all be dependent on how much I need that $950.
And depending on how much you need that $950, what would change? The interest/discount rate. All those, like, what if this and what if that, and do I need it more now or later? That's all factored into the discount rate or to the interest rate. That's where it captures all that subjective components as well as a bunch of objective ones. The cash flow doesn't change, but your perception of that value or your risk associated with that value changes based upon the discount rate or the interest rate you use, which is really what consumes or takes into account all of those variables. What do I expect inflation to be? How badly do I need that money today? Is somebody going to come break my kneecaps if I don't pay them back tomorrow? Is this a better deal or not? That's all. That's all in the interest rate. The cash flows don't change. There's the equation. There's the equation solving. And again, this is one that it's not an annuity. And so when you're trying to solve it in Excel, it can become a little bit persnickety. And we tend to use this formula called net present value, which we're going to talk about. But essentially, this is the way the formula would work. And you can build it in Excel this way, although it becomes a little bit more cumbersome. What do you think that first bullet means? Future value contains interest where present value does not. Yeah, so when you're looking at a value, if it's a present value, there's no interest in there. That's the value today. The future value assumes that you've been paid interest each period. And so when you're seeing a future value, it contains not only the original present value, it also contains the interest associated with the reinvestment of those proceeds or the interest that's going to be paid at the end. The present value essentially takes the value that's paid at the end and takes all the interest out and says, this is what it's worth today, assuming I'm going to get these payments over time. This is a summary of the problems we just looked at. And an opportunity cost, or interest rate, or discount rate of 10%, a lump sum payment today is the same as a lump sum payment of $931.70 in 3 years. And we saw that solved through present value, we saw it solved through future value. You end up with the same answer. And if this was $935 in 3 years, the present value is $702 or $704. So the present value is a little bit higher. The present value is $700, has no interest. The $931.70 contains the $231.70 of interest, which is that 10% compounded year over year over year. That interest is your compensation, is the time value, or is the monetary value for that time that you are not able to utilize those funds. It's compensating you for the risk associated with giving those funds to somebody else. And there you can see the interest calculation for what that's worth. So as I mentioned, we solve for everything. You'll end up having to solve for the payment amount, the interest rate, the number of periods, the present value, the future value. The easiest way to solve for this in Excel is to use a rate function. However, we're going to walk through the theory here today. Suppose you pay $78.35 for an investment that promises to pay you $100 5 years from today. What annual rate of return, what interest rate will you earn on your investment? Does anybody know what what security this cash flow stream looks like? You give somebody $78.35 today, they pay you back $100 5 years from now. There's no intervening payments. It's not a regular bond, but you're on the right track. Nope. It's called a zero coupon bond. You'll see that in some of the problems as well. You see zero coupon bond, that means that you've got two cash flows. You've got cash flow out, right? You're $78.35. You've got a cash flow in the future, $100, and there's no coupon or no interest payments being made in cash at each of the intervening periods. Instead, it's all saved up and given to you at the end. And so if you see zero coupon bond, it looks like this kind of cash flow. Companies will issue zero coupon bonds. We'll talk a little bit about them, but I'll dive into it now because I raised it. Companies will issue zero coupon bonds because they're growing so fast they want to reinvest the money, so they don't want to pay interest. They essentially go, look, we're going to grow so fast that in 5 years I'm going to be able to refinance this bond and pay you off the full $100. But right now, give me $78.35, and I want to reinvest that cash in my business along the way instead of paying it out as interest. And so they issue it at a discount, and then they end up at par or at 100. And in accounting, you'll learn to do bond discount amortization, and that's essentially what they do here, and it becomes additional interest. The other thing we end up solving for is N, so the number of periods. So if you've got a payment that's out at 68.30, and it's going to give you 10% a year, how many periods does it take to get to 100? And again, each one of these is relatively simple math. In Excel, you can use the goal seek function, which if you haven't used the goal seek function, again, we may touch on that if I have time on Wednesday. The goal seek function is a pretty nifty tool, or you can use the rate function or the period function for this to come up with the number of periods for solving for N. When we look at compounding, there's a couple things to keep in mind. And these are things that will tend to trip you up over time, and so I want to make sure that they're called out. Normally, when you see a problem, it's going to be expressed in terms of an annual percentage interest rate or an annual percentage rate of return. And it's going to say something like compounded monthly, compounded quarterly, compounded semi-annually. What do you do? So if I said, so if I said there's a loan payment, there's a 3-year loan, monthly payments, %12 interest. At $100 per month. When you're trying to solve for what the present value of this, because this is just a present value cash flow stream. We're going to pay out $100 a month at 12% interest on a 3-year loan, and the payments are going to be made monthly. And we go to build in Excel our table on how to actually solve for this. You're going to need a couple components. You're going to need payment. You're going to need present value. You're going to need future value. Or you may not need future value. You're not going to need future value in this case. You're going to need rate. You're going to need number of payments. Uh-oh. That's not much better. Number of payments. God bless it. So we're trying to solve for So if we're trying to solve for present value, and I've said you've got a loan payment, and it's a 3-year loan with monthly payments at 12% interest, and it's $100 a month, and we're building the table in Excel on how to solve for this, what's the payment amount? 100. What's the rate?
1%.
How much? Who says 12?
Well, their monthly is 1%.
Who says 1%? Who's sleeping and doesn't know what the answer is? That's most of the class. 1%. Number of payments. Who says 12? Who says 3? Who says 36? God bless it. 36. So here's the no. My basketball ball never came back. So when we look at this, we're really going, okay, if it's compounded on a more frequent basis than annually, most of the time our formulas and word problems are going to be stated in terms of annual interest rates. And so you need to actually divide by the number of payments. So if it's monthly, that's 12 payments in a year. If it's semi-annually, it's 2. If it's quarterly, it's 4. So you need to multiply the number of payments, and you need to divide the interest rate. Otherwise, you're going to end up with really wrong answers. Oh, man. It was late when I was putting this together, isn't it? Future value of a lump sum be larger if interest is compounded more often, holding the stated R constant. Why? You know what? The Eagles won. So as long as the Eagles won.
And now the city's on fire.
Well, tragic for Philadelphia.
You have been they're applying the interest to the interest rate to the interest rate we received in addition to the interest and the other interest rate.
Okay, so let's bring it back. Let's bring it back. Okay, so given a series of payments, if it's compounding more frequently, holding R, the rate constant. So if we're compounding quarterly, or we're compounding monthly, or we're compounding daily, which is going to have the highest value? Daily. And for those of you who have suffered through quant methods, you probably learned compounding continuously, which gives you just a slight bit more. So the more often it's compounded, that little fraction of an additional interest compounds for that little fraction of an additional time, and it grows that fraction of an additional more, which is about as logical as my first sentence. So compared to annual compounding, you get a greater present value the more frequently it's compounded, holding all things, other things constant. So holding rate constant and payment amounts constant. Here's some tips and tricks for solving word problems and or real life problems, because it's going to be important that you extract and use the right data. So the simple interest rate, which the book will call R simple, and I will just normally call R, is the interest rate per period. So in the case of the example I put on the board, it's going to be 1%, because that's the rate per period, because you have 36 periods. The annual percentage rate, it says it's equal to R simple, and it's essentially R simple annualized. So R simple times whatever it's going to take to get it to an annual rate. If it's daily, times 365. If it's quarterly, times 4, etc. Then the effective annual rate is essentially calculating the real interest rate, the interest rate that's actually being earned on that money. So if it's compounding more frequently than once a year, the effective annual rate is higher than the stated annual percentage rate. So if you think about that last, well, I'll give an example. There's one coming. Couple other things to keep in mind. Our simple is generally, the simple interest rate is what you see in contracts. It's what you see stated. It tends to be what we use in our timelines. It tends to be how we express interest rates. The interest rate per period is taking the stated annual percentage rate, dividing it by the number of periods, and the effective interest rate is used to compare returns on investments with different payments per year or different compounding periods, or yeah, that'll cover it. Compounding periods are different periods per year. Whenever you have a simple interest rate, you've also got to have the frequency of compounding. If nothing shows up, it's for frequency of compounding. What is assumed to be the frequency of compounding? Annually. Yeah, that's what you meant. Annually. So if you don't see compounded quarterly, compounded monthly, compounded daily, compounded whatever, it's assumed to be annual compounding. Normally, in the real world, what you get is monthly compounding or daily compounding. And here's examples of how they're going to be stated, how you'll see it stated, which is 8% compounded quarterly. What's the effective rate per period? 2%, very good. 8% compounded daily. Something small. You're going to divide 8% by 365, and that's going to give you your daily rate. %8 compounded quarterly, 2. 8% compounded monthly, 8 divided by 12.667. Remember this when you're putting the stuff together in Excel, because you're going to have a real challenge if you don't. Any questions before we adjourn for today and get ready for Wednesday? Reminder, if any of you are starting to have problems or challenges with Chapter 4, make an appointment to come see me. Make sure you've got this stuff down, because this is the foundation upon which the rest of the finance house is built. Thank you very much. I'll see you Wednesday.